Well, I'm so excited that our listeners are with us today because we're going to be tackling a topic that is so present for so many leaders right now. The COVID crisis has left teams exhausted. I am constantly hearing from my clients, from folks who subscribe and follow us online, that people are done, right? That we've endured being at 10,000 RPMs for longer than we could possibly imagine. Mm-hmm. And to overdo my metaphor, we have been redlining for too long. And now there's no end in sight, right? We have no idea how much longer we're going to be asking people to juggle everything that's going on at home, face so much challenge and crises at work, divide their attention, try not to get sick, and just be turned up to 11, Spinal Tap reference, for the foreseeable future. And so what I want to talk about today is, what should bosses be doing to help people keep going? Where do you start?
You know what? I feel that burnout so hard, right? This is like my gig. I was burnt out before, this whole thing started. And now you layer into COVID and all of these layers of who we are professionally, personally, and they all have to be done all at once now, right? Working from home or working out of the office or whatever it might. We have to be everything to everybody all the time. Remote school, add that all in. Where do we start as leaders? I think you start as a boss with yourself. How are you taking care of yourself? How are you managing your own burnout? Because let's get real. If it's not happening to you, you're probably in denial.
Or you're completely isolated from it
right.
in some way that you should probably be grateful for, but that's not realistic for most.
No, absolutely. I don't think it is. So I think it's got to get real personal real quick. At least for me, that's how it's got to work.
Because when we ourselves are threadbare and worn out and our gas tank is empty, we're much more likely to go in the workplace and not be the best version of ourselves, right? Not be as emotionally intelligent, not be as empathetic, not have as much compassion for the suffering that others are enduring. And so we're going to be more likely to snap at people, less likely to make time for them, right? There's this shift that kind of occurs when we become more and more exhausted. We make less space in our lives for the needs of other people. And if our jobs as bosses are primarily to do that, to show up in such a way that we create the conditions for others to thrive, we stop doing that when we are ourselves worn down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are you doing to make that space for yourself so that you can hold that space for others, right? So completing the stress cycle, moving your body, all of those things. What is the mental space that you need to clear out? How do you protect those things? These are questions that if you're not getting from the people that you boss, then you need to start asking them for yourself, because they're coming. Those questions are coming. And if you're in a position where maybe folks haven't asked you those questions, then you have to start asking, why haven't they asked me for what's working or how they could, potentially be more present in their professional role or manage things a little bit better or differently. What does that say about who you are to them?
Right. And those interactions aren't always going to happen just because that person comes to you as the boss.
Right,
there are some folks,
it's not always going to be organic, right?
And there are some folks on our teams that never step into the discomfort of that conversation for all of their own reasons. We as leaders have to not wait for people to come and tell or come and ask. We have to go and get it, right?
Yep.
If we're really stepping into our primary role as leaders, which is to meet people where they are, then we have to go to them and we have to ask them, what are you dealing with? How are you balancing it? What can I do to help you? What can I do to be supportive of you? And some folks are going to give you one-word answers because that's how they're wired. And so that's a perfect transition, because obviously we have to work on ourselves. We have to make time for ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves. But there are also a handful of interactions. Let me say that again and not stumble over it. There are a handful of interactions that we as bosses need to have consistently over time in the midst of such crises. And, one of those kinds of interactions that I think people naturally gravitate toward, but that wear off quickly are kind of the pep talk.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I think early on when people are facing difficulty, it's pretty natural to say, hey, guys, I've seen you handle so much and we can do it and we're going to get through it together. And
the good old pat on the back.
We do the rah-rah.
Right.
And I think some leaders are really hardwired for that, and they're good at that, and they bring that energy to the workplace. And 9 times out of 10, that's a really welcome thing.
Sure.
But in the midst of our current circumstances, when we have endured for so long and there's no end in sight, that goes from being welcome to being obnoxious.
It does.
And so the pep talk alone is not the only strategy we should be embracing. I think leaders have to be intentional about acknowledging that, hey, maybe we're not fine. And hey, maybe we can't do it. And maybe this is harder than we ever thought it could be. But let's just get through today.
Yeah.
Let's just focus on surviving today, acknowledging that it's not all roses, that there's a light at the end. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but we haven't gotten close to it yet. There's no light. And if you are approaching the light, or if you're not approaching the light at the end of the tunnel, then acknowledging that is an act of empathy.
What I hear you saying is that we as bosses need to be able to say, it's okay not to be okay.
Right.
And I'm here for you. We're here for you, collectively not being okay together. But we're just going to keep doing this until we can all be okay again.
Yep.
Right?
And we have to couple that with a continuous flow of information.
Yeah.
Like, people want to be in the know. They want to be in the loop. They don't want to hear about things secondhand.
Yeah.
And when with so much constantly changing right now, so many organizations and institutions out there, especially if you work in healthcare, if you work in government, if you work in public service, there's policy and regulatory changes sometimes multiple times a day, depending on what state you're in, depending on what kind of work you do. And so in an environment like this, you can't overshare. I think you cannot possibly give too much information. If you have to call 4 team huddles during a day to keep people on top of things, then you do it. And you let them know, listen, the one thing I want to avoid is you feeling like you don't know what's going on. This is all hard enough already without us feeling like we aren't that we're in the dark about what's happening. And so I think one of the primary roles of a boss at any level, in addition to taking care of themselves and working to have those more empathetic interactions with their people, is to commit to a continuous flow of information, even if it might seem minor.
Yeah. I think I'm going to pull that right back out that you said, you cannot overshare. That's a perfect mindset. Should I, apply that filter that we as leaders generally do? Is this important? Is that you cannot overshare, period. Transparency, that continuous flow of communication, that's deeper and supports what you're trying to do, deeper than anything else that you can do is saying, continually communicating.
And taking out that step of asking, is this important?
Right.
If we remove that from the equation, if we just decide every time I get new information or different information, I am going to be intentional in sharing that, in broadcasting it to my team, then you will never get caught in a place where you evaluated something as inconsequential that the team actually hears secondhand or would have liked to have heard as soon as it lands. And then you can decide in the moment, what's the best vehicle to share this information through? Is it by calling a huddle? Is it sending an email? Is it one-on-one in the hallways? Hey, by the way, I just heard X. And you just go around and have those conversations quickly. With so many people working remote, one of the challenges might be figuring out how, in a remote environment, can I constantly update that information, which is where we can avail ourselves of technology. Things like our teamwork platforms, things like Slack and whatnot, text messaging, Messenger. If you have a regular standing one-on-one with people virtually or a group meeting virtually, or things like email. If you diversify the flow of that information, people won't become blind to it as well. So you decide you're going to share information, you pick a medium, and then you change it up periodically so that people aren't becoming worn down and tuning it out.
Right. Absolutely. And I heard one key word that you said there that also piques my interest, this intent. This, then people can't question your intent when you are the flow. You are the flow of communication, so that whenever we don't have to have that burden of the filter, or, who needs to know this, and should they understand this, and is this really at something that they need in order to do their jobs. Without those filters, there's a lot less room for ill intent or any kind of misperception.
Yes, the assumption of malice.
Yes.
Yes, that people have and say, oh, well, this person's power hungry, or they don't care enough about us to share that information. You're absolutely right. And that sets up, I think, a chance for the leader to ask the team to do the same thing going the other way. So if the leader says, I am going to, a pipeline has connections on both ends. And so I am going to be the connection that flows information to you from the people that I stand between, right? The frontline leader stands between maybe director level or senior leaders and the frontline staff. So it's their job to push the flow of information down, for lack of a better word, down to the frontline team. I'm also going to ask my team to be a connector to push the information that they encounter constantly up to me, because they see and experience things just because of the chair that they sit in that I won't see or hear. And so I'm going to ask them, listen, I'm going to commit to constantly sharing information with you, good, bad, or ugly, so that we're all in the know together, and so that you don't ever feel a disconnect from what's happening across the organization. But I need to ask you to do the same for me. I need to ask you to be a connector so that I understand, and you push that flow of experience and insight, and what are your challenges, and what's really hard, and what's happening, and what are people saying, and you're pushing that up to me so that I can continue to push it up to them. And so we are all operating on the same knowledge base.
That full circle that we were talking about is, if people aren't coming to you, right? It's because you haven't created that flow, maybe, right? So in order to receive the experiences and have that level of understanding, you have to start the flow somewhere.
Have to start it somewhere. I want to go back to where we started, which is this idea of self-care. Because I think it's so easy to say, when everyone is threadbare, when everyone is worn out, it's almost harder to make time for that. And so I hope what people take away is, I need to make time for myself. I need to engage in the practices that lead me to healthy feelings, healthy thoughts, healthy body, right? And that's different for everybody. Maybe it's making sure I get enough sleep. Maybe it's making sure that I get my exercise in, 4 days a week, or just taking a walk with the dog, or my meditation or yoga or a journaling practice. Even if we just devote 10 or 15 minutes a day, and it is an unbreakable commitment. I read something the other day from a woman who talked about that the only way she was able to commit to a regular exercise habit was by telling herself, it's just like brushing my teeth. I have to do it every single day. And once they embraced that, it became a regular practice for them. But the other thing that we have to do as leaders is try to encourage our personnel to do the same. When people come to them and express being exhausted, or maybe they're not even expressing it. Maybe as a leader, I'm just noticing. Then sitting down and saying, listen, I can talk to you about what's happening here at work. I can talk about how we're trying to get through it together. But I just want to take 5 minutes and check in with you and find out if and how you are making time for your own physical and mental health.
When we talk about self-care, that my hackles go up, because I'm like, I'm not a selfish person, right? And I had to do a lot of my own work to realize that self-care is not selfish, right? And that inhabiting the habits of what our ultimate goals are. So everyone that's listening here wants to be a boss hero. They want to boss better. You want to boss better? Inhabit that habit. So what do awesome boss heroes like you all do? They make the space for themselves to make sure that that's how they can show up each and every day. And so talk to your folks, talk to yourself about what it is specifically. just like brushing your teeth, that you're going to commit to do for yourself each and every single day to make you continually that boss hero.
Well, I couldn't have said that better myself. That's your hardcore takeaway. She's a professional coach, folks. I mean, you're getting that for free.